Canton, Ohio, the home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The place where the most notable figures in the sport are forever enshrined in bronze for their contributions to the game of football. I've personally never been, because there's no way I'm going to spend $300 to take a flight to Northeast Ohio and then pay nearly $50 for a ticket. However, from watching the virtual tour, you can really feel the history and greatness radiating through the screen from footage shot from someone's iPhone. But just a mere 357 miles away lies the home of the other most notable figures in the sport of professional football that didn't quite make the cut for their place in Canton. In Scranton, we have the Pro Football Hall of Very Good. The Hall of Very Good is home to the professional football players that didn't quite meet the qualifications for the Hall of Fame, but still needed a place to be enshrined and remembered for their very good contributions to the game of football. Sure, the Hall of Very Good isn't as popular as the Hall of Fame, but that doesn't mean that we should forget the players that have been inducted here. Today, we're going to be heading into the 2010s offensive wing of the Hall of Very Good to build the best lineup from this crop of inducted players. But before we start remembering the players for their very good contributions to the game of football, let's go through the categories that need to be met for a player to be eligible for the Hall of Very Good. Number 1. The player can't already be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, obviously, or have been selected as a Hall of Fame finalist. So that means Eli Manning, even though many people may categorize you as a Hall of Very Good player, sorry, you're not allowed here. Number 2. The player can't be within 10 points of Pro Football Reference's Hall of Fame Monitor average Hall of Fame score for each individual position. So for example, the average Hall of Fame quarterback score is 108, which then disqualifies both Ben Roethlisberger and Phillip Rivers for the Hall of Very Good. Number 3. The player also can't be widely considered a future Hall of Famer. So although someone like Trent Williams is 20 points below the average Hall of Fame score for offensive tackles, he is widely considered a future first ballot Hall of Famer, so it just feels wrong to put a player like that in the Hall of Very Good. Number 4. No MVP selections. I know not all MVPs make it into the Hall of Fame, but if you were at one point voted as the most valuable player in the National Football League, I think that makes you more than just a very good player, even if it was just for one season. And number 5. The player must have played at least 4 seasons between 2010 and 2019. Now from this group of eligible players, let's go through the factors taken into consideration for who will actually be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Very Good 2010s offensive wing. Number 1. Statistical output. Number 2. Consistency. Number 3. Peak season. And number 4. Playoff success. Then after we've selected the players to be inducted into the Hall of Very Good for each position, we'll choose the ultimate starting lineup for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offense. We're going to be running 11 personnel. So 1 quarterback, 3 receivers, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. Got it? Okay, let's go. First, let's look at the quarterbacks that have been inducted into the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing before we choose our starter. Here are the 4 quarterbacks from the 2010s that have been inducted. Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, Joe Flacco, and Andrew Luck. And here are the other quarterbacks that were eligible and considered, but ultimately didn't make the cut. This group of 4 quarterbacks, from 2010 to 2019, threw for 125,646 yards, 824 touchdowns, had a combined 20 playoff wins, and won 2 Super Bowls. Andrew Luck had an incredible 2 seasons in 2014 and 2018, but he could be a bit erratic during the playoffs and also played the least amount of games during this decade. Joe Flacco had by far the most playoff success, with a dominant playoff run in 2012, throwing for 1,140 yards and 11 touchdowns to 0 picks, but never really had a dominant regular season, with his best coming in 2014, throwing for just under 4,000 yards with 27 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Now, I was going back and forth on whether to include Stafford on this list at all, because folks are very split on whether he's a future Hall of Famer or just a Hall of Very Good player. But the one thing that many people do bring up that tipped him over the edge to Canton is that he won a ring with the Rams, which was outside of this decade. So for the sake of this exercise, we're just going to say that he's still eligible for the Hall of Very Good. After sitting out the majority of the 2010 season with a right shoulder injury, Matt Stafford had 7 straight seasons throwing for over 4,200 yards, including an incredible 2011 season where he threw for over 5,000 yards with 41 touchdowns. Stafford never won a playoff game in this decade, and although playoff wins aren't a quarterback stat, he was never able to get over the hump in Detroit. His best shot was in a 2015 wildcard matchup against the Cowboys that featured a controversial moment where the refs picked up a pass interference flag in the fourth quarter, but also featured Stafford fumbling the ball twice on what would have been the Lions' final drive. And that leaves us with Russell Carrington Wilson. Russ had playoff success very early in his career with a Super Bowl run in his second season. And yes, he didn't have to do that much for the Seahawks to eventually win the Super Bowl, as he was backed by the Legion of Boom and only threw for 524 yards and 3 touchdowns across 3 games. But in the following postseason, Russ saw more individual success, and even after throwing 4 interceptions against the Packers in the NFC Championship game, which isn't great, ended up throwing the game-winning touchdown in overtime, which is better. As far as regular season success goes, one thing Russ was, especially towards the latter half of the decade, was efficient. Compared to the other 3 quarterbacks who all averaged double-digit interceptions during this decade, Russ kept the ball out of harm's way, averaging around 8 interceptions from 2012 to 2019. The trade-off from that is sacks, which he took a lot of. His best regular season performance was in 2019, where he threw for 4,110 yards, 31 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions, along with 342 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Wilson was in MVP talks the entire 2019 season, but ultimately lost out to Lamar Jackson. So taking all of these things into consideration for these 4 quarterbacks, Russell Wilson ultimately takes the starting quarterback spot for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive lineup. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opinion about that choice, so let's quickly move on to the big boys in the trenches to see who'll be on the starting offensive line. Now first I'll preface, there are a few players on these lists that could be viewed as potential Hall of Famers, which would disqualify them from the Hall of Very Good. But most were on the fringes, with the majority of the public opinion deeming them as Hall of Very Good players. Also, making it into the Hall of Fame as an offensive lineman is extremely difficult, so it's good to keep that in mind as well. So with all that being said, first, let's look at the offensive tackles. Here are the 3 left tackles from the 2010s that have had the honor of being inducted into the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing: Joe Staley, David Bakhtiari, and Dwayne Brown. And here are the other left tackles that were eligible considered, but didn't ultimately make the cut. And here's the only right tackle from the 2010s that has had the honor of being inducted into the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing: Mitchell Schwartz. And again, here are the other right tackles that were eligible and considered, but didn't ultimately make the cut. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that I dissected these players' film and formulated an assessment based on their pass and run blocking technique. Rather, I just used accolades and our trusty friends over at PFF to choose who the 2 starting tackles would be for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive lineup. For our left tackle spot, we're going to go with Joe Staley, who is sort of borderline Hall of Fame, but mainly viewed as a quintessential Hall of Very Good player. This was a tough decision because both David Bakhtiari and Dwayne Brown were both highly accomplished left tackles during the 2010s as well. During the 2010s, Staley made 6 Pro Bowls and earned 3 second-team All-Pro selections. Also from 2012 to 2018, Joe Staley graded out as a number 2 overall left tackle with a 94.2 PFF grade, ranking 1st in run blocking and 9th in pass blocking. His numbers were very similar to a Hall of Fame left tackle in his same draft class, Joe Thomas. And for our right tackle spot, of course, we're going to go with the only right tackle who made it into the 2010s Hall of Very Good, Mitchell Schwartz, who during this decade made 1 first-team All-Pro and 3 second-team All-Pro selections. There were times throughout this decade where Schwartz was the best right tackle in the NFL, and his performance in the 2018 season earned him the spot of the NFL's top offensive lineman by PFF. Schwartz also came in at the 100th spot on PFF's all-decade top 101 players, so there's that too. Schwartz was also extremely reliable during the 2010s, not missing a single game from 2012 to 2019 and playing 100% of offensive snaps for his first 7 seasons, followed up by playing 99% of his snaps in 2019. Now moving to the interior offensive line, here are the 2 left guards from the 2010s that have been inducted into the Hall of Very Good: Josh Sitton and Logan Mankins. And here are the other left guards that again were eligible and considered, but didn't ultimately make the cut. And here are the 2 right guards in the 2010s that have been inducted into the Hall of Very Good: David DeCastro and Brandon Brooks. And again, here are the other right guards that were eligible and considered, but didn't make the cut. The choice for the starting right guard spot for the offensive line was relatively easy. And although there is conversation on whether or not he should be a future Hall of Famer, for David DeCastro, most folks think that he is right where he belongs, in the Hall of Very Good. And this isn't to take away from Brandon Brooks at all. I mean, starting from his sophomore season, Brooks never posted a PFF grade lower than 74.8, and had 4 years with a grade in the 80s and a career-high 92.9 PFF grade in the 2019 season, which also earned him PFF's Best Offensive Lineman Award. But back to our starter. During the 2010s, DeCastro went to 5 straight Pro Bowls from 2015 to 2019, and was selected to 2 first-team All-Pros and 1 second-team All-Pro. Just like Schwartz and Brooks, DeCastro won the PFF Best Offensive Lineman Award in 2017 and graded out as the highest rated guard, especially in the latter half of the decade. Moving on to the left guard spot, both Josh Sitton and Logan Mankins have very similar accolades. Both have made at least 4 Pro Bowls, have had 3 second-team All-Pro appearances, but Mankins did get selected to a first-team All-Pro at the very beginning of the decade, which Sitton never achieved. Both graded very highly on PFF, but I think Sitton's reliability during this decade gives him the slight edge over Mankins. If we were looking at the entirety of their careers, Logan Mankins would be the choice here, but only evaluating within the decade, Josh Sitton will be the starting left guard for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive lineup. Lastly, let's go to the man in the middle to see who will be the starting center and round out the offensive line. Here are the 3 centers from the 2010s that have had the honor of being inducted into the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing: Alex Mack, Travis Frederick, and Ryan Khalil. And here are the other centers that were eligible and considered, but didn't make it in. Alex Mack, Travis Frederick, and Ryan Khalil were 3 of the best centers in the 2010s. Between the 3 players, we had 15 Pro Bowl appearances, 6 second-team All-Pro selections, and 3 first-team All-Pro selections. Right off the bat, if Frederick didn't sit out the 2018 season battling an autoimmune disease, I believe he would have been the shoo-in for starting center. But then again, if he didn't suffer through injury issues, then he would have more than likely just been a surefire Hall of Famer at the pace that he was playing at. That leaves us with Alex Mack and Ryan Khalil. Khalil beats out Mack with the number of first-team All-Pro selections with 2 compared to Mack's 0. However, Alex Mack was extremely reliable throughout the 2010s, with only 1 season where he didn't play all 16 games after suffering a season-ending leg injury. And when we look at their career PFF grades, Mack held a PFF grade over at least 71 during the entire decade, along with 2 years above 90, whereas Khalil dipped down in the 50s in multiple seasons and only had 1 season with a grade above 80. So taking all of these things into consideration, Alex Mack will be the starting center for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive lineup. So let's look at our starting lineup going from left to right. We have Joe Staley, Josh Sitton, Alex Mack, David DeCastro, and Mitchell Schwartz. Now, let's see who's going to be running behind this very good offensive line. Here are the 3 running backs from the 2010s that have been inducted into the Hall of Very Good: LaShawn McCoy, Matt Forte, and Arian Foster. And here are the other running backs that were considered but didn't ultimately make it in. Now this was a tough decision to make because there were some incredible seasons from this crop of players that didn't make it in, like 2014 DeMarco Murray, rookie year Ezekiel Elliott, and a 1,300 rushing, 850 receiving yard season from Le'Veon Bell. But ultimately I decided to go with McCoy, Forte, and Foster as the inductees to the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing. Each of these players had at least 4 1,000-yard rushing seasons between 2010 and 2019. Both Forte and McCoy had sustained production throughout the entire decade, never missing more than 4 games in a single year. And Arian Foster had 2 amazing playoff runs in 2011, where he rushed for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns across 2 games, and in 2012, where he rushed for 230 yards and 2 touchdowns, again in 2 games. During the 2010s, these 3 players rushed for 24,333 yards, caught for 9,466 receiving yards, and had a combined 209 total touchdowns. Now, deciding who will be the starting running back for the 2010s is tough, especially because each of these 3 players brings something different to the table. LaShawn McCoy saw the most sustained rushing success during the decade and had touchdown production with the 17 and 13 touchdown seasons. He also had one of the most iconic games of all time, rushing for over 200 yards in a snowstorm, breaking off both a 57 and 40-yard touchdown. Matt Forte was a true dual-threat running back that was consistent with nearly 5 straight years, rushing for 1,000 yards, capped off with an 808 receiving yard season in 2014. But the 3-year stretch from 2010 to 2012 for Arian Foster, where he rushed for 1,161, 1,224, and 1,424 yards, and combined for 48 total touchdowns, leading the league in rushing touchdowns twice, is just unreal. Also in 2010 and 2011, Foster caught for over 600 receiving yards and was a legit threat in the passing game. That all coupled up with his 2 playoff runs in 2011 and 2012 just puts it over the top for me. So for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive starting lineup, the starting running back will be Arian Foster. Let's now move on to the wide receiver position, where we have to pick 3 starting wide receivers to fill out our lineup. Here are the 8 wide receivers from the 2010s that have had the honor of being inducted into the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing. Demaryius Thomas, AJ Green, Brandon Marshall, T.Y. Hilton, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Dez Bryant, and Jordy Nelson. And here are the other wide receivers that were eligible but didn't make the cut. Not only are some of these players the most notable names from the 2010s, but if injuries didn't get in the way for some of these players, we easily could have seen some of them in the Hall of Fame. These 8 players went for 62,983 receiving yards and 450 touchdowns. From this group, we had some amazing playoff performances, like a 204-yard game against the Steelers from Demaryius Thomas in 2011, and T.Y. Hilton's 224-yard performance against the Chiefs in the wild card, followed by a 103-yard game in the divisional round. We had some amazing stretches, like Dez Bryant, where from 2012 to 2014, he went for 3,935 yards and an insane 41 touchdowns. And from Jordy Nelson, where from 2013 to 2016, he went for 4,090 yards and 35 touchdowns. Nelson did miss the entire 2015 season after tearing his ACL in the preseason, but came back the following year, putting up 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns, winning Comeback Player of the Year. We had great starts to their careers for AJ Green and Odell Beckham Jr., who both had at least 5 1,000-yard seasons in their first 7 years. We had a dominant season from Michael Thomas in 2019, where he had 149 receptions, 1,725 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And we had an overall just underrated career from Brandon Marshall, who had 8,332 yards and 58 touchdowns during the 2010s. So when choosing the 3 starting receivers for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive lineup, I'm going to pick the 3 receivers by alignment. So an X receiver, a Z receiver, and a slot receiver. For our X receiver, we're going to go with Demaryius Thomas. The other highly considered players for this role were AJ Green, Dez Bryant, and Brandon Marshall. But Thomas's sustained yard and touchdown production throughout the decade, consistently high catch percentage, along with proven playoff success, gives him the edge here. And honestly, Thomas's numbers this decade could have looked even better if he didn't have Tim Tebow under center for his first 2 years. For our Z receiver, we're going to go with T.Y. Hilton. With elite speed and shiftiness, Hilton was always a deep threat while also being able to stop on a dime to create separation. Hilton nearly had 6 straight seasons of 1,000 plus yards from 2013 to 2018, with 33 touchdowns hauled in during that time. This spot ultimately came down to Hilton or Odell Beckham Jr., but Hilton's deep speed and playoff performances, coupled with his consistency throughout the decade, puts him into the starting lineup. And lastly, we have the slot receiver. This was between Michael Thomas and Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson, who played minimally in the slot throughout his career, was utilized heavily in the slot in 2016, where 6 out of his 14 touchdowns came from the slot, along with 35.7% of his catches and 39.6% of his yards, both coming from the slot. And for Michael Thomas, he hovered around 20% usage in the slot, but when he was utilized in that position, he was dominant. In 2017, Michael Thomas was targeted on 40.5% of his routes coming out of the slot, and led the league by far in yards per route run out of the slot at 3.63. And in 2018, Michael Thomas had an absurd 85% catch rate on 147 targets, and then an 80% catch rate on 185 targets in the 2019 season. Both of these players were incredible, big route runners, and were always in sync with their Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Both players also had production in the playoffs. So when deciding who will be the final receiver starting in the slot, I decided to go with Michael Thomas for his reliability during the decade, dominant 2019 season, and multiple seasons with high-level production in the slot. Now to round out our skill group and choose the final piece for our starting lineup, let's move to the tight end position. Here are the 3 tight ends from the 2010s that have had the honor of being inducted into the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive wing. Jimmy Graham, Greg Olsen, and Vernon Davis. And here are the other 3 tight ends that were considered but didn't make it in. Between Jimmy Graham, Greg Olsen, and Vernon Davis, we had 20,215 receiving yards and 159 touchdowns between 2010 and 2019. Both Jimmy Graham and Greg Olsen had a 3-year sustained production peak. For Jimmy Graham, it was early in his career, from 2011 to 2013, where he had 3,507 yards, 36 touchdowns, and was named to 2 Pro Bowls and had a first and second team All-Pro selection. For Greg Olsen, it was later in his career with Carolina, where between 2014 and 2016, Olsen caught for 3,185 yards, 16 touchdowns, and was named to 3 Pro Bowls and had 2 second team All-Pro selections. And although Vernon Davis didn't have the same regular season production as the other 2 tight ends, he was a monster in the playoffs. In 5 playoff games in the 2011 and 2012 seasons, Vernon Davis had 546 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns, which included an incredible performance against the Saints in the 2011 playoffs, where he had 7 receptions for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns, which included the catch part 3, where he caught the game-winning touchdown with only seconds left remaining in the 4th quarter. Each of these 3 tight ends brings something different to the table. Vernon Davis was a hard-nosed runner who constantly shed tackles for yak yards and was a good blocker. Jimmy Graham was a tight end that could handle a high volume of targets and proved to be a reliable receiving threat with touchdown production. But with his consistent production, especially in his time in Carolina, coupled with good playoff performances and bringing above average blocking to the table, Greg Olsen is going to be the starting tight end for the 2010s Hall of Very Good offensive lineup. So let's do a recap of our starting lineup. We have Russell Wilson under center, Joe Staley, Josh Sitton, Alex Mack, David DeCastro, and Mitchell Schwartz on the offensive line. Arian Foster as our lead back, Demaryius Thomas, T.Y. Hilton, and Michael Thomas as our receivers, and Greg Olsen as our tight end. If you disagree with any of these choices or think I missed someone off of this list, let me know who you think should be a part of this decade's starting offensive lineup. Also, if you want to see me do this but with the starting defensive lineup for the 2010s or lineups for other decades, let me know in the comments below.